This is an important talk. Please listen carefully. Do you sometimes blame yourself for not being good enough? Do you sometimes wish that you were someone else? If you do, then this video is for you. Please be still and listen to what I have to say. I will have to speak about that which we call the human ego. And I will have to speak about that which we call ignorance. Don't let that put you off. Please stay and listen. Okay. I will begin by addressing ignorance. Ignorance is mostly perceived as something negative. But all that it means is simply that there is something that we ignore. Sometimes we ignore consciously. Let's just call that for ignoring. That is fine. We cannot contain knowledge of everything that is going on. So a kind of filtering is necessary. And that is why you sometimes can hear a statement like, ignorance is bliss. Or perhaps it would be better to call it for ignoring can be blissful. However, there is another kind of ignorance. And that is when we are ignorant about our ignorance. That is true ignorance. Again, please do not let you be put off by this. I'm not blaming anybody. We are simply just taking a fresh look at it. Try if you can see it like this. The only thing that perpetuates ignorance is ignorance. In other words, if we want to know what is going on, we have to shed some light on it so that we can enlighten ourselves. Ignorance is darkness. Seeing clearly is enlightenment. But ignorance does not want to see clearly. It is afraid to be exposed as being wrong. So it doubles down and it barricades itself. Ignorance is barricading itself behind strong opinions and consequently behind strong emotions. You will therefore most likely encounter strong emotions during this talk, and they will try to persuade you to shut down this video. Whether you do that or not is not in my control. But now I at least have informed you about what to expect. Okay, let's continue. Let's continue by taking a fresh look at what we call ego. The human ego is actually just a cluster of thoughts and accompanying emotions. It is thoughts and emotions that are interwoven into each other, and by that keeping the human being stuck in a closed feedback loop. These thoughts, they are often complete belief systems, and they are enhanced by emotions. It is like a thick blanket that covers your true self. And you have been enshrouded in this blanket since young childhood. And you have been taught that the outer appearance of this blanket is who you are. It is therefore, when we are digging into the belief system of this blanket, it is therefore that it will often be felt as dangerous. Of course it does. For instance, when I challenge your belief system, you will most likely get the sensation of you possibly losing everything that you stand on. That is, of course, so to speak. But because of this, you will most likely hesitate. But I tell you that if you move on past this hesitation, you will start to develop a suspicion, a deep suspicion that there is something phony about your own identity. And that suspicion is why you are listening to me. So this blanket I was talking about, this blanket that covers up your true nature, this blanket is what keeps you in ignorance. An investigation into the truth about what lies underneath the blanket, that will be felt like or I might say that will be a leap of faith. But mind you, I'm not telling you to burn, shred, or by any other means to destroy this blanket. I am simply just inviting you to take a peek underneath. Let's see what we can uncover when we lift the blanket. Okay, so here we go. The most well-known form of the human ego is the classic form. By that I mean it is an ego that is self-absorbed. It is an ego that is arrogant. But for many it comes as a big surprise when I tell that this kind of ego is by far the least widespread. In other words, there is a kind of human ego that is far more common, but that is very rarely talked about. The reason for this is that the classic form of ego is generally extremely noisy. And therefore, the classic form of ego drowns out the far lesser known, but far more prevalent form of ego, the self-destructive ego. So where the classic form of ego is a nuisance to other people in general, the self-destructive ego is primarily a nuisance to its own host. The self-destructive ego is a frightened ego. It is an unhappy ego, a depressed ego, a frustrated ego, an angry ego, etc. And the reason for this is ignorance. Or in other words, it is the human being's deep ignorance of its own true nature. This message is not easy to communicate to the self-destructive ego, because it will almost always hear what I am pointing to here, as if there is something wrong with it. It will feel guilty and simply continue the series of negativity that it is already caught by. But I'm not saying that there is anything wrong with the self-destructive ego. All I'm saying is that it is painful and that it is unnecessary. It is thus possible to step out of these self-destructive habits. But the first step will always hurt. It will hurt. It will hurt because it is a decision to be 100% honest with oneself. And by being 100% honest, there will be a direct recognition of what it is that is unfolding within oneself. So when we become 100% honest with ourselves, it opens up a possibility to see through the automatic processes that takes place in one's own mind. And for the self-destructive ego, this means that one must be willing to see how, through one's own direct observation, to see clearly that one self almost consistently elevates ordinary life challenges to be problems and adversity on an excessive level. And then upon this observation, a willingness to acknowledge that it is one's own interpretations, that it is one's own belief system that are being challenged. A more simple way of putting this would be to say that you do not see the world as it is. You see the world as you are. Or rather, you see the world as you have become. And that you now react to your own interpretations instead of seeing clearly what is going on. A lack of willingness to accept this fact, or a failure to see it clearly, will result in you being in a continuous battle with your own interpretations. That is, you will be in a continuous battle with yourself. Perhaps you have already discovered that. So when we are caught in ignorance, when we are caught in the ignorance of the self-destructive ego, we are not able to see all this. The self-destructive ego is 100% certain that what it encounters is life itself that wants to punish, and that it is deeply unreasonable what is happening. Thereby, the self-destructive ego makes itself an unhappy victim. The self-destructive ego sees itself as a victim. It sees itself as a victim of outer circumstances. And it is typically obsessed with details. And it is unable to see what we could call the big picture. And thus it cannot see that what it is fighting with is itself. It is fighting with its own interpretations and its own completely automatic conclusions. So, on the other hand, when you awaken out of this, when you come to see the big picture, you discover that everything you encounter on your way are just the real and inevitable consequences of being a living human being. But until that is seen clearly, the self-destructive ego tries to take ownership over life. And it seeks to control but never achieves it. And it is unable to realize that everything the ego tries to control will control the ego. Let me repeat that. Everything the ego tries to control will be controlling the ego. And it is denial that perpetuates the illusion, as well as the fact that we are in a culture that contains a collective self-maintaining denial. And by this denial, a collective confirmation of the illusion. But ultimately, the self-destructive ego, it contains its own doom. It is only a matter of how long it refuses to face the truth. In the end, the pain and the suffering will be of such a magnitude that the struggle reveals itself as the illusion it is. This is very important to understand. The pain and the suffering is inevitable because the ego at its core is separation. It is a separation from the source of life itself, and thus a deep experience of being alone and exposed. The self-destructive ego seeks in every way to find a way to remedy this separation. But it cannot be done, because it is the separation itself that seeks relief. The separation arises as a result of the self-destructive ego building a conceptual reality, a mentally created image of how the world should or ought to be like. And then also a mentally created image of how it itself should or ought to look and behave like. And afterwards, the ego then tries to impose the world and itself this mentally constructed image. So the suffering and the psychological pain arises because the ego does not recognize that this mentally constructed image it is trying to impose on the world and on itself is an illusion. It is a fiction, and therefore this illusory image is exposed to a continuous threat of collapse. It is this that leads to a relentless work of trying to hold the fiction together. So when you live like this, then there is absolutely no end to this struggle. And you will never reach a place where you experience peace. This is what has to be acknowledged. This is what has to be seen clearly. So please let me repeat it. When you live like this, then there is absolutely no end to this struggle. And you will never reach a place where you experience permanent peace. Never. This has to be seen and accepted as truth. And when that happens, then there is a potential opening. And then this opening can potentially lead to a person being seized by a deeply felt desire to surrender to truth. Through this surrender, the separation between man and realities ceases. And thereby, the self-destructive ego ceases. So there you have it. And now you might ask, okay, so what now? Give me a method of what to do. Tell me how I can let go of the illusion. But I cannot. There are no known method of stepping out of identification with thoughts. However, historically it has proven to be beneficial to listen to tales of truth. So I encourage you to keep listening to what I have to say. But of course it does not have to be me. You could find someone else that points to truth and listen to them. And then, while you are listening to these tales of truth, I suggest that you develop a strong relationship with stillness, with silence. For it is ultimately in stillness and in silence that you will rediscover your true self. Fall in love with truth. Fall in love with stillness. Fall in love with silence. Fall in love with that. Thank you for listening. And take care, my friend.